Good evening, everybody. As you can see, back with a little bit less hair than usual, but I like it, and I hope you guys enjoyed the new look. You'll be seeing it for a little bit at least. So I am back with the third installment of Linkin Park's Digging Through Discographies, and tonight we'll be talking about Minutes to Midnight. Now, I'm doing something a little bit different tonight, only because I've been a little bit behind on work, and this week and next week are going to be pretty packed full with a lot of stuff. But I don't want to lose any content for you guys, so I don't have as much notes, and I will be reading off of certain things. So you might see a little bit skips and pauses. Don't worry about that. Hopefully, I can still bring out the same good content. Even though I don't have as many notes as usual. This is kind of a stream of conscious thing with a lot of this stuff. We last talked about Meteora and its success, though it wasn't as successful as Hybrid Theory in a commercial sense or an influential sense. I still think it's their better album of the two. Their co-producing on there is interesting, and it leads to very nice experimentation that wasn't on Hybrid Theory. So where do we go from there? Well, if you are Linkin Park, what happens is that they took a little bit of time to work on some side projects. So Bennington appeared on DJ Lethal's State of the Art and other work with Dead by Sunrise, which is a rock supergroup that Bennington headed, though they didn't actually put out an album until 2009. Shinoda did some work with Depeche Mode, as well as, with the help of Jay-Z, formed Fort Minor as a little side project where they debuted the album The Rising Tide, Tied, on November 22nd, 2005, to critical acclaim, at least at the time. There was a lot of really good songs on there. Petrified, Remember the Name, Where'd You Go, Believe Me. A lot of really good songs for the time, and I personally really like that album. But it showed off, Shinoda as a front man for a rap group. And it worked pretty well. Remember the Name was everywhere on every ad in terms of sports, showing the preparation, of becoming a great athlete. And it was a popular song for the time. Another thing that they worked on was a remix album with Jay-Z entitled Collision Course, that debuted in November 2004. I personally don't like this remix album. I think it's very overrated. The idea of mixing Linkin Park songs and Jay-Z songs, while interesting, there wasn't enough originality with it. It was just literally just throwing Jay-Z lyrics on a Linkin Park song, or Linkin Park lyrics on a Jay-Z song. Not really do anything for me. Though it did win the song Numb Encore from the album did win a Best Rap Song Collaboration Grammy in the 2006 Grammy Awards. I personally think it's an overrated song. I don't know why it was all over the place when it was, but I guess I'm out of touch. And then, other than that, they did do a lot of charitable events. Most notably, they were raising a lot of money for the victims of Hurricane Charlie in 2004 and Hurricane Katrina in 2005. They also helped by setting up a relief fund called Music for Relief for the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami and the victims of that. They also performed in Live 8, which was a series of charitable shows. They worked with Jay-Z in Philadelphia on that one, for that particular Live 8 show. So fast forward to 2006, where Linkin Park returned to the recording studios to work on new material. This time around, they did co-produce, but they had a new producer. And this particular producer was Rick Rubin. Now, Rick Rubin has worked with a lot of artists. Most notably, he's worked with Aerosmith, Adele, Russell Simmons, Beastie Boys, LL Cool J, Public Enemy, Audio Slave, Codeine and Cambria, like a mix of a lot of artists. He's a very well-known producer, though he's worked in a lot of different fields, and personally, a lot of different pop people. So it was an interesting choice to use Rick Rubin. They said that they were going to debut the album in 2006, but unfortunately it was delayed until 2007. They recorded 30 to 50 songs in August of 2006, and they said that they were halfway completed at that point in time. Bennington said that the album itself was going to stray away from the new metal sound that you've known on Meteora and Hybrid Theory. So that was an interesting approach. The title itself, Minutes of Midnight, is a reference to the Doomsday Clock, which has a certain function of, like, as things are going wrong in the world, the clock nears and nears to Doomsday, where all hell will break loose, if you will, across the world. Musically, they did a couple of different things. Shinoda and Delson teamed up with David Campbell to add string elements to a couple of songs, Leave Out All the Rest, Shadow of the Day, Hands Held High, The Little Things That Give You Away, at least on the album, and a couple of B tracks. It took 14 months to work on this album, where it usually took 3 to 6 months to work on the previous two albums, because they had so many different songs, whereas the last two albums, they had maybe 40 songs to record or to work with. This particular one had 100. So a much bigger album. They were going to actually make it into a 17-track album until they decided to condense it down. And like I said, it took 14 months to record, and it was delayed a little bit. So this particular album had 5 singles. What I've done that was released April 2nd, 2007, was again the only song that was released before the album, and the album itself debuted May 14th, 2007. So at least this time around, there was a little bit over a month with this particular song before the album was released. Again, though, it's still a weird time where only one song was dropped before the album, but still, it's of the time. And then from there, Bleed It Out was released August 17th, 2007. Shadow of the Day was released October 16th, 2007. Given Up was released March 3rd, 2008. And Leave Out All the Rest was released July 14th, 2008. So, as stated before, this particular album kind of strays away from that new metal sound. So, how does it turn out? Well, the biggest things for me are twofold. First off, Han's electronic work, turntable work, barely noticeable on this album. There is barely any on there. For the most part, his scratching elements are gone. He has a little bit more programming and electronics to certain songs, and that's basically it. But I honestly can't remember most of these electronic parts. Maybe on Leave Out All the Rest. Maybe a little bit on The Things You Give Away, but honestly, there isn't much of that, and it's an interesting thing to hear. The other thing that kind of is gone is Mike Shinoda's rapping. There's only 2 songs where he actually raps on them, and that is Bleed It Out and Hands Held High. Now, personally, to me, Bleed It Out sounds much like a Faint clone, though Faint does it much better, and it's a little bit more interesting to me. Bleed It Out is an alright song, but it follows that formula way too much. Hands Held High, awesome song. One of the best ones on the album, honestly. And it feels more like a Fort Minor song, though, than a Linkin Park song. It has some interesting church organ. It has some really cool snare drum work, kind of like a marching band, and it actually has Shinoda singing the chorus. So this is actually a song that is entirely Shinoda, which is something that we are not used to at all. Shinoda also sings on some of the songs. In Between is one where he sings most of the melody by himself. He also works on backing vocals for What I've Done and Shadow of the Day and No More Sorrow and the Little Things You Give Away. He actually does harmonies and backing vocals, which is the first time that he's delved into much of that. He also does a little bit of rhythm guitar work on there. So, it's very interesting to see the progression or lack of Shinoda, where we saw Shinoda in the forefront and Han in the forefront of last album. This is much more Bennington. Almost every other song has Bennington singing, and there's only one song that I can think of that Bennington actually does screaming vocals on, which is another weird thing. I'm not used to that as compared to the other two, and it's only for like one little part of Given Up. Everything else, like I said, that new metal sound is gone. Replaced is a more alternative rock, more mainstream rock sound than previously known. Sounds like Shadow of the Day, sounds like What I've Done. Those songs are more for a mainstream audience. Same thing with Leave Out All the Rest, more for a mainstream audience. Given Up is one of the harder songs on the album, as well as No More Sorrow. Kind of fits more of this heavier sound from previous albums, but that's honestly basically it. Gone are the angst, the aggression that they're known for from the previous two albums. Given Up is probably the closest thing to that aggression. You still have songs like Valentine's Day, which honestly to me is very much a My December clone. In Between, not really memorable. In Pieces is a nice cut. It has this interesting feel to it, and I really like the guitar work on there. And The Little Things That Give You Away is the first time that Linkin Park has an actual interesting closer that feels like a closer. It's 6 minutes long, and it details, the things happening in Hurricane Katrina, and all the sadness and all the pain and suffering that's going on as these houses are getting flooded and everything's falling apart. And it's a beautiful song that crescendos and has some very interesting parts to it. I would say it's one of the better songs on the album and a deserving closer. On the other end, though, Wake, it's to me, a mediocre instrumental. Doesn't really do much for the album. It's a minute 40, and honestly forgettable for me. The most memorable songs are honestly that chunk of second song up until about 8. Given Up, Leave All the Rest, Bleed It Out, Shadow of the Day, What I've Done, Hands Held High, No More Sorrow. That chunk is probably the most memorable part because that's most of all the singles. So at least it has some staying power single-wise. This album is produced for singles. I will say, though, on a whole, not a bad album. There's a lot of more Gone, like I said, are Han's parts, but instead there's a lot more guitar work. I would say guitar work is the main feature of this album, though it's not necessarily interesting. It's a lot of churning guitar chords with not much complexity to it. Like the complexity and the interesting nature of a lot of the guitar parts on Meteora, it's not there. The contrasting nature is not there. It's a lot of just alright stuff. Given Up, I think it has some of the better guitar work on there. Bleed It Out has some interesting parts. but honestly, and In Pieces has a little bit of interesting parts as well. But honestly, um, it's a weird compromise for me. I understand that new metal was a dying sound at that point in time, but I don't understand as to why the stark contrasts on here. So lyrically, this album doesn't really stray away from much of the previous work. It does have, the the particular song about depression, about anxiety, about giving up. Of course, giving up, talking about giving up on life, um, what I've done, about past regrets and hoping to start again. Um, uh, Valentine's Day in between In Pieces, all talking about relationship for the most part. Valentine's Day talking about someone who has been dumped on Valentine's Day and having to spend it alone. In between, talking about someone messing up and getting in between of what the relationship should have been. And on the other side of it, In Pieces, the next song talking about someone who's been lying and trying to get this particular relationship to fall apart, but saying that the person singing being like, "I will not leave this in pieces. You are the one who's going to be doing that." Um, you know, leave all of the rest, talking about potentially suicide, and when that happens, or if that does happen, to don't regret what the things that I've done. Just think about the memories that I leave behind. Shadow of the Day, talking about someone uh, who's about to pass, and knowing that at this point in time it might be for the best because of the condition that they are in. I will say though that there are a couple of songs that do stray away from their particular nature and lyrics. Um, Most notably, three particular songs, which are "Hands Held High," "No More Sorrow," and "The Little Things That Give You Away." Um, and these two of these songs, "Hands Held High" and "No More Sorrow," talk about politics. First time they've actually talked about politics, which um, is interesting to see that they are mature in their themes and their particular takes on it. I also think it's interesting that "Hands Held High" uh, precedes "No More Sorrow." So you have a song where Bennington, where Shinoda gets to rap and is very plain about everything that's going on, talking about war, talking about the atrocities of war and how it has effects on this country, while the president is not really doing much about it. And then "No More Sorrow," talking about a more, uh, Im, a little bit more imagery and a little bit more metaphorically rather than just plain and simple. And then you have "Little Things Give You Away," which talks about all the atrocities that happened during Hurricane Katrina and all the imagery there. So, for the most part, this album uh, is a mixed bag for me. It's not on its own. It's not a bad album. Rick Rubin is well known for being able to produce successful pop albums. Um, or just successful like songs with albums with successful singles. He is good, but I think because of that, the experimentation isn't as much there. You know, without Han, without Shinoda working together more with Bennington, it kind of leaves this album a little bit flat. Now, yes, there's some good songs on there, and there's a good stretch of songs. But if you were to compare, so for this particular album, it's not bad. It has some commercial success. Um, it's different though. It's if you are looking for angsty Linkin Park, you're not gonna find it here. If you want rapping Linkin Park, you're not gonna find it here. If you want more of Johan on electronics, you're not gonna find it here. You're gonna find a lot of alternative rock, a lot of alternative popish stuff, mainstream rock, mainstream ideas, just with Linkin Park. Um, and if you like that, then go for it. It's not a bad CD. Linkin Park fans probably don't like this as much as the previous two, but it's not a bad CD. So commercially, this particular album debuted at #1 on the U.S. Billboard 200 and also 15 other countries, including the United Kingdom and Canada. It had the biggest first week sales of 2007 at the time with 3,000 albums sold at that point in time. Um, Eventually going to be certified 4 times platinum in the United States. It was also double platinum in New Zealand, Italy, Ireland, and Australia, and certified platinum in Canada, France, Switzerland, and UK. In the first 4 weeks alone, this album shipped over 3.3 million copies worldwide. Singles wise, every single single charted on the U.S. Alternative and main rock charts for Billboard. They all varied in their success. What I've done hit number 1 on both the alternative and the main rock charts. Bleed It Out hit number 2 on the alternative and 3 on the main rock. Shout of the Day hit 2 on the alternative and 6 on the main rock. Given Up 4 on the alternative and 5 on the main rock. And Leave All the Rest hit 11 on the alternative and 33 on the main rock. It was named the 25th best album of 2007. It was ranked number 154 on Billboard's Hot 200 Albums of the Decade. It sold more than 4 million copies in the US and 20 million copies worldwide at this point in time. As for how I feel about this particular album comparison, like I said, this is a different sound for Linkin Park. Like we talked about last week, nu metal was a dying particular genre at that time. And I understand that Linkin Park had to try something different. However, even with the success of these certain singles, I think there are much better singles on the other 2 albums. I think the absence of Han and the absence of Shinoda working together with Bennington makes for a lackluster CD. I think there isn't enough variety on this album in comparison to Meteora, and I don't think there's enough staying potential on this in comparison to Hybrid Theory. So when that's all said and done, that means we're talking about an album that is weaker than both of these 2. So as of right now, it is my weakest album. This means this is number 3. So if we just go through that list again, they'll be coming up. That means we got number 3, Minutes to Midnight, number 2, Hybrid Theory, and number 1, Meteora. So this marks an interesting time for Linkin Park. This style change, the idea of working with Rick Rubin, and it makes us wonder, what is this next album going to be like? Because again, we said nu metal's dying. So what do they go from here? Well, we'll find out next time with 1,000 Suns. But before that, if you of course like this, please like the video, comment on where this ranks as one of your favorite Linkin Park albums, or just your memories of this particular album. Share this with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and just keep on watching. So hopefully this doesn't seem too jumbled. I think this wasn't too bad, even with the lack of notes this particular time. I will see you all on Friday or Saturday for another cover song, and then Sunday for an album review with a special guest. I won't tell you just who just yet, but I will see you then. Peace.